Welcome to the Gen X Experience, the podcast that celebrates the unique journey of 80s kids navigating midlife. I'm your host, Blythe Alperin. Each episode, my guests and I will share with you the unique differences that define our generation and how we are navigating those differences in the real world. Join me for laughs, insights, and a sense of community. Let's embrace the Gen X Experience together. Welcome back to the Gen X Experience, episode 26. And this is a new month, which means we have a new topic and new content. This month, we are talking about solo traveling. And why are we talking about this? Because last year, in November, I took myself on a solo trip with a group. We'll get in more on that in a minute, to celebrate my 50th birthday. It was one of the best experiences of my life. I fell in love with Portugal, and I also became a huge fan of Wild Terrains, which is the group that I went on the trip with. It was such a special, curated trip that is not like any experience I think most people get to have. And thankfully, today, we are going to have the founder of Wild Terrains on the podcast. I got to interview her, and you'll hear that in a minute. Her name is Lauren Bates. But before we get into my conversation, where Lauren will talk about why she founded Wild Terrains, why Gen Xers, well, really anybody, women especially should be solo traveling. So let's learn a bit about my guest. Lauren Bates is the founder of Wild Terrains, an innovative women's travel company that collaborates with women entrepreneurs, chefs, artists, and designers around the world. Lauren always knew her most fulfilling travel experiences happened alongside inspiring women with important stories to tell, so she dreamt up Wild Terrains to share some of that magic. More than 7 years and hundreds of successful trips later, Lauren and Wild Terrains have been written about in the New York Times, Elle, Vogue, National Geographic, and more. In 2024, Lauren also founded Studio Womankind, a launchpad for brands that propel women forward. In this space, she dedicates her time to one-on-one mentor sessions with aspiring women and entrepreneurs and an annual 8-week marketing course designed to help women-centered businesses grow and thrive. Before launching Wild Terrain, she was the chief marketing officer at flower delivery startup Urban Stems. Lauren is a graduate of Vanderbilt University with degrees in mathematics, Spanish, and financial economics. When she is not on the road, she calls Boulder, Colorado home. Because she spends so much time on the move, she relishes quiet moments spent outdoor, preferably on a trail or paddleboard with her dog, Milo. So without further delay, let's get into my conversation with Lauren. I am so excited to have Lauren on the podcast to talk about solo traveling and Wild Terrains because, as some of you may or may not know, I am a one-time alumni of Wild Terrains. I went to Portugal with Wild Terrains in last November. It was one of the most amazing trips of my life. I'm so thankful I found Wild Terrains, and I'm excited to talk to Lauren about it. So let's talk a little bit about what inspired you to start Wild Terrains.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you. Where did I even start? So we're 7 years old, so it feels like a long time ago that we started the business. And really the original inspiration was 7 years ago, the travel landscape for women looked really different. There weren't a lot of options for group trips that weren't super specific, like yoga retreats, surf camps. A lot of the trips were divided by kind of age. So you had like young trips for older women. I felt like the market for women in their 30s and 40s was kind of like this missing piece of the travel landscape. And I also felt like myself and a lot of the women I know who were in that age bracket were looking for more dynamic trips. You know, they're not able to take a ton of trips a year. It's really like a special treat when they go on like a week-long trip to Portugal. And so I wanted those trips to be filled with interesting women, food, art, culture, design. And that felt like a missing piece in the market 7 years ago. Also, something really important was, 7 years ago was kind of like the Me Too era, this idea of supporting women-owned businesses, which I think feels not as prevalent as I would like it to be now, but it's certainly more prevalent today. It really 7 years ago was not even part of the conversation. And so that felt like when I started to dig into the travel industry, because I wasn't in it before, and I started to realize who the big players were, where money was going, doing my due diligence of how do I support the local economy and make sure that, when I'm spending money on behalf of all of our travelers, that it's going into the hands of people that align with our values. And so this idea of supporting all women-owned businesses kind of came into the picture early on, and really has become such like a powerful cornerstone of our business. And I think it really, as I'm sure you experienced on Portugal, I'd love to hear about your experience, but um, I think it really makes the experience as a whole feel a bit different than other group trips because you are all coming together with this like shared alignment of wanting women to thrive in the world and, in a really fun vacation oriented way you're redirecting tourism dollars into the hands of women, which is super powerful and has a massive economic impact in all the places we visit. So that's really the why. And it's been so fun to watch it grow and learn and get to meet travelers like you along the way. And yeah.
That was one of the things that drew me to the trip is like I wanted to go in something different because a lot of, travel group trips are going to the typical touristy things. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's I didn't want to do that. I wanted to like really get into the locals and like learning things, and that it was so cool to get to meet artists and entrepreneurs and women who are doing really cool things and to stay at these really amazing locations and to eat the best yogurt I've ever had in my life. we
Where
were
did you have the best yogurt?
it was in Lisbon, like the first hotel. Like it was funny. We would have conversations about the breakfast, and
Yeah.
I'm not a breakfast person, but I literally or a morning person. I would get up every morning. And I'm like, oh my god, I get to have the yogurt and the
Oh
fresh
my
squeezed orange juice
God.
and like the little. It was so great. So speaking of that, how do you find the places to stay and without giving away your secrets, obviously, like the women to that want to be a part of these trips?
It's really not a secret. Like I'm an open book.
Okay.
It if there is like a part of it that's secret is that it's just a lot of hard work and there's no like sexy answer to it. But the way well, one, I think uh something I think we do well, which you experienced, is taste on trips. So like, when I'm very picky, I'm the one who still picks the hotels we're staying in. Like, none of our travelers are staying in a hotel that I have not spent multiple nights at, slept in the bed, know the owner. Like, it's just, yeah, I really pride myself and our business in the quality that we have been able to sustain across a lot of different destinations. And I think the reason is that we're experiencing everything ourselves and we have like a pretty high bar for the standard that I want our travelers to have on our trip. So all of our hotels are amazing and the food has to be amazing. None of those I would say those components of the trips are very much at the forefront of when we're building a destination. Whereas I think for some travel companies, it's a bit of an afterthought. It's kind of like, okay, we're going to go to Paris. Like you said, we're going to see the touristy things. That's sort of the priority. And then they just find a hotel that's well located, can accommodate a big group. But like how the traveler feels in that hotel is maybe not a cornerstone of that decision. And so yeah, so I think for us, that Lisbon hotel that you're talking about is the Lisboans. It's owned by three sisters, Tanya, Marta, Marissa. And I've known them for 7 years now, and they're amazing women. So I love supporting them, but I also think they have uh, an attention to detail that I really appreciate. And so the hotel is fabulous. And you have breakfast in your room, which
Yeah.
is so fun. It's like a apartment. That's like the wrong phrase for it because it's so well done, but it's an apartment style hotel where you have a bedroom, a living room, and like a little kitchenette. And they bring breakfast to your door every morning. And at first, I was like a little unsure about that because I like the group having breakfast together. But I also think as women, we don't have like a lot of slow mornings
Mhm.
in life. And so it's kind of beautiful to like get to stay in your pajamas and not worry about how you look and have your breakfast while looking out at the orange tiles. And then you're in a great mood starting the day. So I think all of those little details are things that really differentiate us because we're thinking about them. We're like, how are you going to feel eating that breakfast in the morning? And I think for a lot of, that's when you're thinking about all of those details across 30 to 40 trips a year, it's a lot to think about. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's true what you're saying about the hotels because a lot of times when you go on trips, like you're like, okay, we're going to be going. I just want a hotel that's like decent. Like you might pick 1 or 2 nights in a nice place, but the hotels on the Portugal trip, they all were memorable and they did make the experience even better and did give you those moments of like the slow morning or if I just need a nap or a rest, you just felt comfortable. And each experience was different and it did add to the trip. And you can't, yeah, you're right. You can't really say that about a lot of other group trips or even your your own trips that you plan because you never know what you're going to get, especially if you're traveling
Totally. That's
overseas.
yeah, that's such a good point. And I think like that's the secret piece that you don't see is, like in Lisbon, it's an ongoing process. So like when I first built the Portugal trip, I stayed in a bunch of hotels in Lisbon and I settled on the Lisboans and that was for like a bunch of different reasons. But you don't see the like dark side of like I stayed at a hotel that the door didn't fully close or the bed was uncomfortable or the staff wasn't nice or and so we're curating that and that takes a lot of work and energy. And then I still I even though I'm super loyal to the Lisboans, I keep tabs on what's opening in Lisbon. Is there anything new? I'm it's not a set it and forget it business model. It's like we are constantly evaluating and reevaluating and making sure that our clients are having the best options available to them.
Yeah, it was exciting every time we went, the 3 places we went. It was like, where are we going to stay? And the experiences. I mean, it was like I wasn't expecting the hills though.
Yeah.
Like those, you're like, I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting. And then it was like raining because we all felt like, you get to a certain age, you're like, okay, I could fall down the
Yes.
street. So,
The Lisbon Hills and Porto, but the Lisbon Hills are like no joke. And that if people haven't been to Lisbon, the sidewalks are made with these like beautiful old tiles that are hundreds of years old, but they are very slippery when
yes.
wet. So if it's raining, and there's all these funny like reels on Instagram that I see sometimes of people, who've moved to Lisbon and then they show like just to get a coffee, how many hills they have to walk up to get their coffee. It's definitely a workout
It
to be in
is, yeah.
Lisbon.
But I mean, it's worth it because it's so beautiful. And also speaking of the guys, like Rita was loved her. She was so great, like just so kind and let us know what was going on and made sure we were all comfortable and would tell us things. So when you're choosing the guys, is like, do you put like they come to you? Do you go out and search? Like, how do you find? I mean, I've only been to Portugal, but I'm assuming every guide is as amazing as she is.
Yes, Rita's very special. Rita's also been with us for basically the entire time. And the first year of the business I ran, we were only in Mexico City and Portugal, and I ran those trips. And then very quickly I realized like this is not going to be sustainable for me. And also, it's just a better experience to have a local guiding you. And so that we shifted to the trip leader model right before COVID, and Rita came on during that time. And we've learned a lot. We've had to hire a lot of trip leaders. So we're in 7 countries now, and we've had to, it's a really difficult thing to hire in so many different cultures, and like
Really.
where English is the second language for everyone, and to be respectful and understand the customs. It's an interesting task. So, um if I could clone Rita everywhere, I would. Like every new place we go, if I could find the Rita. So that's what we try to do, is find the Rita. And I think we've learned a lot. It's this very special skill set to be able to
Mhm.
hold space for a group over, you know, for Portugal, it's 8 days. And to also like be paying attention to group dynamics. So, do you have more extroverts than introverts, or is everyone getting enough time to talk at dinner? Like, so it's just there's a lot that the trip leader is doing that, if they're doing a good job, probably goes unnoticed, just because it's very subtle. Um, and so we really rely on our partner network for to hire a trip leader. So that's something that we hire the trip leader last. So we build the destination first. We bring on all the partners, so like the hotel owner, the chefs, the artists, and then we go to that group of women and we say, here's what we're looking for in a trip leader. Um, and like, do you know anyone who would be a good fit? And that has pretty much every time worked well, because the partners also want to have someone they like interacting with and seeing. They see them. In Rita's case, she runs 8 trips a year, so they see her 8 times a year, and it's enjoyable for them if that person is someone they like, or maybe like a friend. Or so, yeah, it's really, we rely heavily on what we call the Women's Whisper Network. It's just like this like underground tunnel system of like all the creative women know each other in a place.
Yeah, you could definitely feel like every person that we met, they knew Rita and had a very, comfortable rapport with her. Sometimes they would try to like think of a word they were trying to say in English, and they'd like ask her in Portuguese, and I'm like, and she knew, and
Mhm.
I'm like, that's because, I mean, yeah, having to talk not in your native tongue cannot be easy in front of a group of strangers. But yeah, you bring up a good point, because yeah, it's true. Like, the guides are dealing with lots of different people who, you know, maybe they're very well traveled, maybe they're not. You don't know if everyone's going to get along. Like, the age range can be different. In our group, there was one person in her 20s, and I think the rest of us were probably like 50s and up, or late 40s and up,
Mm.
which was really
Yeah.
cool. And I mean, because I live in Atlanta, and I swear I go to so many events where I'm like the oldest person in the room, which is fine. But sometimes I'm like, okay, I'd like to be at least with a mix. So it was nice and everyone was so interesting too. That's the thing. I think the Wild Terrains brings, people are really interesting and come
Yeah.
from different backgrounds. But yeah, it was, and we all just got along. We had one funny thing. We were driving, our driver from Lisbon to Santa Cruz. We had him one time because I think he thought he was on the Audubon, and
Oh my God.
he was driving so fast. And the women and I, we were like looking at each other, and then we stopped at one point, and I was like, "Does anyone feel like we're going really, really fast?" Because I thought maybe I was the only one. They're like, "No, no, no."
Yeah.
And so it
Did
was,
Rita say something to him?
well, I think we said something after, because she was in the other car, and like we were trying, we didn't
Oh,
want him to. So, but we were like looking at each other in the car, and it was funny because at one point one of the women like was trying to take a picture, and they're like, we're like, things are just flying by.
yeah.
You're not gonna, and then we were all trying to like look at the speedometer, and he didn't come back the next day. We had different,
Yeah.
yeah. So
I'm our team's pretty good about
yeah,
correcting stuff like that when it happens. So,
which I was glad, because like when we went to Porto, and then of course, going to the Douro Valley, that road in and out of there,
super windy.
it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's no joke. It's
Yeah.
gorgeous, but you want someone that's not going to drive like a maniac. when you're like, I could plummet off the side of this valley. So speaking of the locations that you go to, so the first one you said was Mexico City and then Portugal.
Hmm.
And I know you go to France, New Orleans, Argentina, another 2 locations in Mexico. You used to go
Yeah.
to, until last year, you went to Iceland, and now you've added Japan.
Yeah.
How do you decide what locations you want to go, or when you want to stop going somewhere and change to somewhere else?
Yeah. It's very hard actually. Like Mexico City and Portugal were kind of gut instinct for me. All of them are a bit of gut instincts, but Mexico I had spent a lot of time in. I speak Spanish. Argentina I studied abroad in, so I already had some connections there. Portugal's really interesting from a European destination because it has kind of like the warmth of a Latin culture.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, with all of those, we were just a bit uniquely timed to kind of be ahead of the rush. Um, Now I think we're having, there's a bit of decision paralysis on where to go next. We're trying to figure that out. And so sometimes uh we think there's an interesting story to tell. Everybody's going to Japan, but I think nobody was telling the story of like what it's like to be a woman in Japan
Yeah.
and what it's like to own a business as a woman in Japan, which is very rare. And so that has been a really interesting story to explore. And I think the travelers who go on that trip are going to see a side of Japan that no one sees. I mean, and just because of how women are treated in society, it's very rare to be a woman's chef in Japan. And so we had to get creative. So most of our dinners, you're going into private homes and having dinner with a woman who's an amazing cook, but doesn't have her own restaurant. And you're going into her home and having dinner, which is actually like a very it's a privilege. It's rare to be invited into someone's home in Japan if you don't have a super familiar relationship with them already. So that just made Japan a really compelling place to bring travelers, and we felt like we could do it in a different way. Um, we've been exploring what's next. So we were looking at Italy, some places in Italy, Croatia, uh, we're looking at Santa Fe in the US. We're about to launch Menorca in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes the deciding factor is like we think a place would be great, but then we start doing research and we can't find what we need. So Croatia ended up being sort of in that bucket. Like we were really excited about it. We think travelers would be really excited about it. It has some similarities to Portugal, which does really well. But the hotels that are women owned are just really limited. And so we struggled. And I think after doing quite a bit of research, I think we're probably going to not pursue Croatia because of that. So there's a lot that happens behind the scenes that travelers don't see that we say, nope, can't do that because it doesn't meet our quality standards. And it means we can't support women owned businesses if we take travelers there. And so if those two things don't exist, it's not aligned with our brand and we won't pursue trips in that place for the time being.
Well, I vote for Italy, so
Yeah.
I'm dying to go there. But no, you can see in the trip like that it's been very well thought out. So I can only imagine how much work goes into putting it together, because you've got hotels, you've got the women that you're, the chefs, the artists, all everyone participating. Then you have to coordinate, the drivers and going to different
Hmm.
locations. So how long does it usually take you on average to like build out a trip? I mean, does it depend like
Yeah.
how long it's going to be, or?
I think it depends on the complexity of the culture. Like Japan, we started researching years ago, but like really like made it like a large project for the team in early 2023. and I went to Scout at the end of 2023 and at the beginning of 2024, and then our first trip is in a couple of weeks. So that was like 2 year it's really 2 years, uh, before we can even run a trip. And then the first trip in a destination, we don't make any money because we need to bring a photographer. I need to go. That we're training a trip leader. There's just like a lot of expense. So then you're really not even like making money off a trip until maybe 2.5 years from when you
Wow.
started. So it's a lot of work. A, a destination like Santa Fe, I would guess would take us like a year, maybe, because it's English speaking, it's closer proximity, it's easy to hop on a plane and go figure something out there. Um, but yeah, it's a long process, super long process.
Yeah, and then if you think about, yeah, the traveling to another country, to different especially Japan, that is I took Japanese, in high school and then a little bit in college, and, we did get to explore some of the culture in my class in high school, but, I mean, it's a long trip. It is a very unique culture.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I'm excited about that trip. I definitely wanna check it out because I've because I took Japanese, I've always been interested in the culture because we really didn't talk that much about women. It just you talked about the culture, but it felt like it came from a male perspective, even
Yeah.
though one of our teachers was a woman. But um, yeah, so let's talk about. I saw you had a post, I think either a few weeks ago or a month, about how women over 50 are becoming the largest um, travel group. And being so, I mean, I'm just 50. I will be 51 in August, but um and being on my trip where most of the women were like, older. Why do you think do you think that women that are, Gen X boomers and, older millennials, why do you think that they are inclined to not just travel but really to go on, they want experiences besides just the normal trip?
Yeah, and I think your trip skew is probably abnormal for us. Like, I would say it's usually more spread out, so probably like early 30s to early 70s, but like very spread out within that range. But the same dynamic you're talking about, like it's a really nice dynamic to be in a group of women that is in all different life stages and has different life experiences to share. I think it's really beautiful. And it's one of the favorite things we get feedback on. But I think, you know, we talk about this a lot because as a team, because we are trying to figure out like, okay, how do we find more women like you that's like our, ideal customer. And so we talk a lot about what women are looking for in different stages of life. And so the thing that I think there's some obvious stuff, women 50 plus have more disposable income, with every year we're more educated. So it's educated women who have disposable income, maybe chose to never have children. And so there's in this phase of life where they have a lot of freedom, or maybe they're becoming an empty nester, or they have teenagers at home who are more self sufficient so they can leave for a week. Um, I think also women are starting, I think we're a great option for someone who's maybe hesitant to travel on their own, maybe has a partner or spouse at home who doesn't like to travel as much. And so, like, we're a great option for them to kind of say, okay, I'm going to go on my own, but I'm going to be with this group. And that feels safer and more comfortable. And like, they don't have to manage as much. And then I think we've been talking a lot as a team about this epidemic of loneliness that is
Mhm.
coming up a lot. And I think that is a cross generational issue that prompts people to look for other ways to find connection. And I think we're a solution for that. So I think that applies also to younger women, women in their 30s who maybe have outgrown some of their friendships from an earlier age. It's really hard to make friends as an adult. Um, or maybe they are not in a life stage yet where they're getting married and having kids, but all their friends are, so they can't travel with their friends anymore. So I think that's a reason that group, that age range comes to us, is they say, okay, maybe I'll make a friend on this trip that's like-minded like me, loves to travel, uh and they're looking for connection because it might be lacking in some other areas of their life. Um and I think the same is true for women who are 50 plus. I think women, we, I think having not been through this stage myself, I say this with like caution that I don't know yet. I don't have my own opinion on it, but I hear a lot that, if you had children, you dedicated a lot of your life and time to raising children. And I think there is this sort of self discovery phase that comes later in life sometimes. And travel is an amazing avenue for that. And traveling with other women exposes you to other women who are going through the same stage of life. And, maybe you learn something from them about hobbies they've picked up, or, you know, things that they've done to take care of themselves and nurture themselves. And then I think if you didn't have kids, um, and you are maybe like winding down a career, there's just also this other like self-discovery phase that comes with retiring or figuring out this sort of like second life chapter, especially if you took a route that was considered maybe like untraditional. I put in air quotes because, I think all the life choices are beautiful. But I think there is this sort of phase for that type of woman who's saying, okay, what are the new unconventional routes I can take with my life in this stage of my life? And travel is an amazing way to be exposed to other ways of living and being, um, and to meet like-minded women. And I think that's a cool thing about our partners being all women is some of our partners you'll meet and they had a career in finance and then they opened a wine bar, and now they own a wine bar in Lisbon, and that's their second act. And so I think there also is this like possibility of being inspired on our trips by the women's stories that you're going to meet. And what does that do for what you envision for your life and yourself? I could talk about this forever. I really think it's fascinating.
No, it is because yeah, it's true. No matter where you are in your life, like if you're in your 30s, maybe you're thinking about having kids, but you're not ready yet. But you're like, okay, I want to get some travel in because when you do have kids, you might travel, but the travel is going to be focused on more how do you entertain them so that they're not driving you crazy. They're still going to drive you crazy, but and then as they grow up, like trying to also keep them entertained. And then, also when you're younger, like some of your friends might be getting married, but you're not there yet. Or when you get older and you're like, I just concentrated on my kids or I just concentrated on my career and now I want to go do something. And it is nice to like get in a group of women where they could be all ages from different backgrounds and have we had really interesting conversations and just getting to know where people were coming from. And I mean, we talked about dating in our
Yeah.
later
I
years.
love that. I love it so much because I really think it's something that sometimes we get some questions of like the youngest and the oldest of, am I going to fit in the group? And I always try to say like, no, you don't understand. Like the beauty is that everyone's coming from different life stages and it makes the dinner table conversation so much more rich and interesting because it's not a bunch of 30-year-olds talking about like when they're going to have kids. I don't know. You're not all in the same life stage. So you shift from focusing on what would be a typical conversation for that age range into this like broader, beautiful, rich conversation. So I'm so happy to hear that the conversations on your trip were interesting.
Yeah, it was fascinating too, just to learn, the commonalities that you have, the differences you have. We had two sisters from Canada on the trip, and it was funny. I have a sister, so when they were talking, I'm like, oh yeah, I can tell that you guys are sisters just because it's a whole dynamic. So I was like, it made me miss my sister. Unfortunately, she's afraid of flying, so I don't know if I could ever get her to come with me. But it was like it was nice to just kind of see the dynamics. And one thing too I love about like solo traveling in a group is that as women, it doesn't matter how old or young we are, traveling as a woman, even if it's whether it's in the United States or abroad, can be scary,
Mhm.
and you can feel unsafe sometimes. So, even though we're all strong, independent women, we still have to worry about that. So it's nice to have a group that you can do things with, so that you're not feeling like you're alone. But then also,
Yeah.
having time for yourself, so you can go explore Porto by yourself, or you can take excursions by yourself if you don't want to do one of the events. So it's a nice, but you always have that like kind of like home base.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. I think the home base is so important. It takes, like, a lot of pressure off, which I think we've been jokingly called the group travel company for type A women because we are so organized. So it allows like that type A traveler who's like used to planning their own trips to just kind of sit back, like know it's taken care of, know that we have impeccable taste and like everything will be done well and be present and enjoy the company that you're in. And I think for that specific type of woman, they rarely get to do that. So I love that we can provide it for them. And to your
mhm.
point too, it's like there is a safetyness factor. Like I'm a very adventurous traveler. Obviously I started a travel company, um but I think there's just something nice about being in a group and not like you said, like you just don't have to worry about it. It's just it takes another thing off the list that you're having to kind of like think through and worry about. I don't know.
Yes, yeah, and because I'm kind of the one where I'm like the planner, and sometimes I'm just tired of it. Uh,
Yeah.
and it was nice to like I purposely on this trip was like, you know what, things are planned. I'm just gonna sit back, and on the times that we have free time, I'm gonna decide either the day before or that morning what I want to do, and I'm just gonna go with the flow and like not feel like I need to control everything. I'm pretty laid back, but when I go on trips, I'm like, I want to know where we're going, what we're doing, and
Mhm.
unless I've decided I don't want to do that. So it was nice to like feel like you could let go and just kind of enjoy and be surprised by like we went foraging for cocktail ingredients and then got to sit outside on a mountain, like on the hill, like eating homemade food. And how often
Yeah.
do you get to do that on trips unless you know someone?
Yeah. Wait, I love that you said that you're kind of like the control one and like it sounds like we gave you enough information to feel like, okay, they've got us. Wild Trains has got us. And like you could relax because that says a lot, you know?
Yeah,
I'm a
and
control
also that
freak.
you
I understand that.
yeah.
I really get it.
Right. Well, also it's nice too is that, there were guides for like, okay, when you're here, you can go do this, you go shopping, or you could go on some,
Yeah.
historical thing, you could do this. So it was nice to like have those options. So, and decide, maybe I want to go shopping. Maybe I just want to walk around. Maybe I want to go to a museum and then, then explore the city. So it was really, and the excursion to the Douro Valley, spending a day with winemakers was so just so cool because we all, you go to California or certain places and you can tour a winery, but you don't
Mhm.
really get the behind the scenes
Yeah.
and you don't get to sit and eat in the door,
Yeah.
just sit outside and again have homemade food and hear the story of the winemakers and the history of the area. And, it was just such a incredible excursion and so fascinating too how they grow wine there. I'm like, it's
Yeah. It's
not,
so
it's
different.
it is. Yeah. Um, yeah. And you're like, when you think of a valley, like that's, I don't know, maybe I just didn't know what to picture, but if just, it's not what you think. And then you're like, okay, this is, and watching them like, harvest the grapes or they were harvesting olives. It was so interesting. And then getting to try white port was so
Yeah.
cool.
The
I,
port wine is so delicious. Like
it's
I
so
think
good.
in the US we get not the worst kind. We just get the mass market. port, it's just because they don't ship it here. And so I used to always be like, I don't really like port. It's too sweet, it's too syrupy. And then Sandra, the winemaker at Wine and Soul, when I first met her, she like took me back in the cellar and like undid a barrel that was like her grandfather's port or something. It's like 100 years old. And you taste it and it's just so delicious. Still sweet, but so complex. Like if you're a wine lover, I think port is so interesting in Portugal because you have this idea of what it is and then you try all these different kinds and it's so just delicious and unique to Portugal. It's really, yeah, port's so interesting.
Yeah, I ordered some for Thanksgiving.
Oh,
And
amazing.
so yeah, I brought like white port to Thanksgiving, and then we had tried orange wine when we were in Lisbon, and
Yeah.
I loved it, so I ordered that too, and that bottle was gone.
Cool.
The port I got to bring home because
Yeah.
we started the orange wine, and I ordered some other bottles from Wine and Soul. That's what I love too, going to other countries, like getting to try, the food, and then being like, okay, I love America, but our food is just not the same.
Yeah. Everything's so fresh. But you can have bad food in Portugal too.
Oh
It's just
yeah,
we've curated,
yes. Well, and also like we have to, our food has to travel across the country, and they might
Yeah.
like Portugal's not that big.
Yeah.
So if they're doing local, it's not traveling, hundreds and thousands of miles.
Totally.
Yeah.
Portugal's like
So
the size of New Jersey. It's like really not that big.
it's funny because I never, before going on the trip, I never, not that I like had anything against Portugal. It just never occurred to me. I'm like, oh, Italy, Spain, like, and then reading about the trip, I was like, this sounds amazing. And Portugal is amazing, and the people are so welcoming and kind, and they love having Americans there. I'm like, but I'm thinking, please Americans, don't ruin the country.
Yeah, totally.
Please don't price everything out or have them be like, oh, America. But yeah, it was, like I had an Uber driver who was like, like go here and asking me questions, telling me things, like a little tour guide on my trip, which was really, they were just very nice. And
Yeah. It's
and
very easy to work in Portugal.
it seems like it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see why people move there, because it's
Yeah.
a very easy country to navigate,
Mhm.
if you don't speak the language. Which, yeah, I felt bad. My first Uber driver, he was like, I'm sorry. I go, I don't know any Portuguese. I felt bad, and he was like so understanding, and I was like, okay, thank you, because he was asking me questions about America, and I was trying to like explain things to him, because Europeans don't always understand like how big our country is,
Yeah.
but then trying to explain it so he understood it. And so, but it was really, again, one of my, like, I think my last breath, like I still will remember this trip. It was just so great. And
Aw.
telling people all about it. I talk about Portugal all the time, and I definitely want to check out more trips. Excuse me. So when you're planning, like for the future of Wild Trains, do you see it expanding to more trips, or do you like to keep it sort of curated so it's not, I mean, because it's a lot of work for you to figure
Yeah.
it out.
We have a team though. We have a team. It's not just me. Um yes, I think my vision has always been 12 destinations. With like one or two kind of like always cycling in or out. So we're at 8 now if you count the 2 in Mexico.
Mhm.
So we're getting there. I don't have like a 5-year plan of where we're going. It's always been kind of what's happening in the world and what makes sense for the business. So I definitely think we'll grow and we'll expand. We're trying to figure out like this goal of like connection and community that's a part of our trips. How can we recreate that in a smaller dose experience in the US? So we've started with our domestic trips. We have New Orleans, we're going to work on Santa Fe, but also like could we have like a supper club or some sort of like in-person experience in the major cities in the US that would allow our travelers to come together? I think we're big enough now that that would make sense. Like every major city has like enough people where that would make sense. Um, and that's really the goal for us, is to create spaces where women can connect with each other. So travel was like the first medium for that. But I can see us exploring different ways to make that possible down the line.
Well, because it's nice too when you sign up for the trip that get to virtually meet the people before. So, which was nice
Yeah.
because like we had conversations about, does anybody want to go to this? Does anybody want to go to that? We're doing, it was, so you had a little bit of an idea of who people were, not, a
Yeah.
deep dive, but like at least, like, hey, if I want to go to dinner somewhere or I want to check out, we went to see Fado music, like there's people to go with. I don't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were going to tell any women who are, in Gen X or whatever age, like um to encourage them to try solo traveling with a group, what would you say if someone was like, I want to go, but I'm a little apprehensive? What would like be your message to them?
Um, I mean, just book the trip. I think I've never heard someone say they were disappointed they booked it. And I think the apprehensiveness comes from 99% of the time that question, will I fit in? And I sort of think it's the wrong question, because I think the beauty is that everyone will fit in, but it's okay if you're different, different age, different life stage, different appearance. Like that's the beautiful part of our trips and our spaces, is that they're really designed to allow for that group of women to come together. And like we're so intentional about every decision we make, just like introducing the group ahead of the trip. Like that is an intentional decision that we made to foster connection ahead of the trip starting. So I think that's what I would say, is try to, like, if that question is coming up for that woman of like, will I fit in? The answer is yes. And to just take a leap and book it. We have so many women who have come to us apprehensive about coming alone. They book one trip and then they go on all the other ones because they're hooked. They just like
Mhm.
love it so much. They have such a good time. And I think once you go on one and you realize like what the group is like, you're no longer apprehensive to like put yourself on the other trips with different groups of women. It feels like a treat to do that versus a scary thing.
Right. Because even though as you get older, you're like, I don't care what people think, when you're going on a trip where you're going to be in a car with people in a hotel, like,
Yeah.
you are worried about like, will I fit in? Will I like the other women? Like, what's going to happen? And also, I think another reason to go to with Wild Terrains is like, you get the group time, but you also get some downtime and alone time, which is
Yes.
especially important. Like, I'm an introvert, and that was one of my concerns. I'm like, am I going to have enough time to like recharge?
Yeah.
And I never felt drained the entire time. And I did have that time. Like, I loved just getting up in the morning and having the amazing yogurt and
Yeah.
just
It's something
relaxing.
we've really, every trip we're like constantly, Portugal's been running for so long. I feel like it's like perfect now. But for the first couple of years, we tweak based on feedback, like this day was really long, or this day, these things back to back as an introvert felt like a lot. I was a lot of like listening to people, and that was too much. So we're always like, every year we shift the itineraries to try to get like the perfect balance of group time, alone time, structured time, free time to explore on your own. And every trip is a little bit different because of the dynamic of what's happening on the trip. But I think, again, that's something we're super intentional about. And so for the people that are also introverts, like we've talked to all the introverts and gotten their feedback and incorporated it. And, that's just how we do it. So it's really, I think, a well thought out experience for like all different types of women.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. And I think if go with like open mind and just be like, I'm just going to show up as myself, then you take, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, you take the pressure off and you're like, I'm just going to
Yeah.
show up.
You also
And
don't have to like everyone. Like it's
right.
12, the groups are 10 to 12 women. And I think those are small enough that it doesn't feel like crazy big, but also big enough that if there's someone you don't like totally jive with, you don't have to sit next to them at dinner, you know? So I think that's another thing that I always just suggest to people is like, you know, it is hard when you go in a group of 12 people you don't know. Maybe there is someone you're not going to be like best friends with, but I think our brand attracts a kind, conscious traveler, and so you're already starting with like a group that's a pretty good group in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think too, when you think about traveling, solo, whether you're a man or a woman, like if you're going to a group and it's other solo travelers, they're all going to be thinking the same way as you, like, am I going to fit in? Am I not going to fit in? What if I don't get, like, so we're all in our heads thinking the same thoughts. We just don't realize it. And so, and everyone's there to like be together, but also separate. So there's not, it's just, yeah, like you said, just book the trip.
Yeah.
Um,
Just book
and
it.
yeah, it'll be worth it, and you'll get to see really cool things. So have you ever thought, like, I know that the trip has unique experiences. Have you ever thought about adding in like a little bit of I don't want to say the touristy things, but like, you know, seeing a few of like the historical things, stuff like that? Have you thought about adding that in, or do you strictly want to keep them to the unique trips that they are?
It exists in some places like New Orleans, like you go to the French Quarter. It's a historical tour with the wild terrains kind of bent, but you're seeing like the French Quarter. I'm trying to think what else. Like in Japan, we're doing a tea ceremony, but it's like a modern one with led by a woman and a woman owns company. So like I think we are always like we're not ignoring the like traditional touristy stuff. It's that we're trying to figure out the best way to incorporate it. Uh and then we've since you went on your trip, we've launched detours, which are like half day. They're like 3 to 4 hour experiences. And those are bookable. Like if you went back to Portugal on your own, you could book a Portugal detour. A lot of travelers do that. Or for if you have free time during a trip and you want something like way more structured, you can add a detour in. And so we're starting to add some of the more like touristy stuff as a detour. So
Mhm.
like outside of Lisbon, Sintra is like a big attraction.
Yes.
It's a little too, for me, a little too like Disney World like to put it on our trips, but I get the appeal and I get that if you've never been to Portugal, it's something you feel like you should see. So we're probably going to add it as a detour so that it's optional. Like if you've already done it, you don't need to do it again. If it's your first time, you can book it for your free time. We'll still have a wild terrains angle. Like it'll be a woman guide. It'll probably touch a bit more on like the women characters who are a part of that history. Um, but like we have a feminist tour of the Louvre on the Paris detours. So like we're trying to get to like check that box for people of the
Mhm.
touristy things you feel like you should see, make them still interesting, like an interesting way to see them, and then also not force the group to do it all together.
Right. Yeah, like if someone's already been to Paris.
Yeah.
Yeah, the two sisters, they did do it. They like a excursion to Central. Yeah, and then a couple other
Mhm.
people that came in earlier stayed late, like because of the way our flights were.
Yeah.
They did excursions, and I was like, oh,
It's
I
also
should have done
it's
that.
hard to do those touristy things with 12 people. Like,
Yeah.
it's just better. I think it's a better experience if you want to see the Louvre to go with a guide and maybe it's two of you or three of you. But listen, like having a group of 12 and a guide having to talk to you in the Louvre is just it's like a tourism disaster.
Yeah.
It creates overcrowding, it's hard to hear, it's not the best experience. People have different paces in experiences like that. So, like moving through a museum or, going to see the Eiffel Tower, do you wanna just look at it or you wanna climb up? It's like people have different preferences. So, I like the, like, select your own adventure in that
Mhm.
arena.
Yeah. Yeah. Having been to the Louvre many years ago with my family, it was crazy. I literally remember going to look at the Mona Lisa and doing the jumping up and trying to see it, and then being like,
Yeah.
this is not fun.
Right.
because it's so crowded. So yeah, having and then when I did one of the museums in the museum in Porto, and there was like a group there, like a lot of people, and I'm like, okay, I'm really glad that I got to explore this on my own and see what I wanted to
Hmm.
see. And when I was done, I was done. So
Yeah.
yeah, I like the detours. So you can go things, and it is smaller, so you could, if you're like, I don't want to see that, or I know like some of the castle, like they were, if you're claustrophobic, you wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
So, and as someone who is claustrophobic, because I had a little moment in the van, in the door, I was in the back, and I'm like, okay, I need to be up front because the walls are closing in on me. Because unfortunately, my claustrophobia has gotten worse as I've gotten older. Um, so embarrassing, but like, you want to have the options. I think that's cool to give people a chance to, and also like it's nice that you can be like, if you want to come in early, you can stay in the hotel, you can go, or or if you need to stay a day
Yeah.
later, it
Yeah.
gives you options.
I love when people do that because then they're like over their jet lag, they've acclimated. I think that's just like a really nice way if you can do it to
Yes,
start the trips.
I should have done that because I was so jet lagged. Well, my flight there was not great. So I couldn't sleep, and
Yeah.
yeah, it was a little bumpy and not that long. It was like 5 hours. So from Boston. So yeah, I was like, I should have come in the day before
Yeah.
because
It's really like anyone going on a wild trains trip, come in the day before.
yeah.
It sets you up for success.
Yes, I highly advise that because I learned my lesson. Next time I will go in a day early because you do need that jet lag to go away. And it just
Yeah.
takes, I feel like it just takes a day and then you're like, I'm good to go.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me and sharing a little bit about Wild Terrains, how it came to be and how you guys plan your trips, and to encourage women to just book it and to go and try solo traveling with a group because you will not regret it. Yeah. And you guys have really curated at least the one I went on, and I know other the one of the sisters, Mary Ellen, was talking about she had gone to Argentina, which I'm like, that's not on my list. That it
Yeah.
just seems like you've really curated the trips to make it enjoyable for everyone, to give unique experiences, and to make it, a place where you feel comfortable. Because again, as we said, like traveling as a woman, even today in 2025, is still just not always so easy or safe.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm so glad you had such a good time on the Portugal trip. Let's get you on another one sometime
Yes, I'm
soon.
definitely, yeah, I like Japan sounds really cool. I'd love to go to Argentina. I'm thinking about New Orleans as well because I haven't been in a very long time. I think the
Maybe
last
your
time I was there,
sister would do New Orleans
she
with
might,
you.
because we could actually drive from I think it's 6 hours from Atlanta, but yeah, she might.
Yeah. Yeah, you
Because
could
the last
drive.
time I was there, I wasn't old enough to partake in the drinking. Not that I want to, but like, you know, New Orleans is known for some of their
Yeah.
cocktails,
Yeah.
so
And the hotel we stay at has like great
it looks
bars and like
really cool.
cocktails. It's very fun.
And I love like the experience. Like, don't you like go on a little boat and go somewhere like that looks so
Yeah.
cool.
You spend a day with Melissa Martin, she's really like the most famous woman chef in New Orleans. She owns Mosquito Supper Club. She has a couple of cookbooks, really well known. And you go out to where she grew up, which is south of New Orleans, about an hour to the bayou, and she
Mm.
cooks like a whole meal for everyone, and it's very relaxed, but it's super special. I mean, she's a James Beard Award winner. Like to have her cook a home cooked meal for you that's like the most delicious thing you'll ever eat. It's really like an epic day. It's worth I think the New Orleans trip is worth just for that day, it's
Right.
worth the price of entry.
Well, and
Yeah.
how often do you get to go in the bayou to go experience delicious food?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
you
not
never.
never.
It's not like where we take you is not a tourist attraction. So, it's really like where real people live and where it's the source location of all the seafood that you're eating in New Orleans. So, it's a really interesting that trip has some interesting, like, environmental and climate change kind of undertones to it that you're
Mhm.
talking about throughout the trip because New Orleans is so impacted by it.
Yep.
Um, So it's a fascinating trip, like if you want to get into like the cultural sort of what's happening, the cultural landscape of New Orleans. It's really fascinating.
Because that's a very unique, my best friend loves New Orleans, and that's a very unique place that just has, mysticism
Yeah.
and just interesting, just even, I remember the one time we went there, I mean, I was younger, but just like going on a tour and seeing the way you have to, not to get morbid, bury people because they have to be above ground because you can't bury them in water. So it's just a
Yes.
very interesting culture and location. And so, yeah, that trip sounds incredible.
Yeah.
So if people have questions, if they want to like reach out to ask about going on trips or having, I know you have a lot of FAQs on your site, but where's the best place if someone had a question about a trip or wanted to know more that you would send them?
Yeah, there's a couple of places. I mean, going to our website, so wildterrains.com, it's pretty informative, so you can find a lot of the information you need there. If someone has like a specific question, hello@wildterrains.com is the email that goes to the whole team. And we're always online answering questions. And then if someone's on Instagram, our team's also really active in our DMs on Instagram, so that's another place. But we're pretty easy to reach, and yeah, we're setting up for a pretty busy year this year. So I'm excited for all the
Good. And I
travelers who are
definitely
already booked.
encourage people to go to the website, also to follow on Wild Terrains on Instagram, because you guys put out a lot of very informative content and interesting content. And there's tons of pictures of all the different trips.
Yeah.
So you can
We
kind of,
always get questions, are the pictures real? And I'm like, yes, they're real
I'm like, I
because they're
know that
so
location.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. They're as beautiful as the trip will be. Well, thank you
Yeah.
again, Lauren, for talking to me. I'm so excited to share Wild Terrains with everyone because it is now part of my experiences, and I can't wait to check out more trips in the future.
Thanks so much for having me. This was so fun.
Thank you again to Lauren for being on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed my interview with her and learning more about Wild Terrains, why it was founded, how they curate their trips, and why us Gen Xers, well, really any woman, should be going on solo trips with groups, especially Wild Terrains. All of the information about Wild Terrains will be in the show notes. I highly encourage, if you're curious about their trips, to check out their Instagram and their website. You can actually see itineraries for the trips for each location on their website and get all of your questions answered as well. And next episode, I'm going to share more details about my trip so you can really hear about the experience from myself. And we'll also do a little look back at what it was like to take vacations solo for the first time as 80s kids, whether it was like our first time we got to travel alone, or maybe, when we went on field trips, that was kind of alone, but also kind of not. So stay tuned for that. And as always, do not forget to like, subscribe. We are on Apple, Spotify, where you can watch this podcast, and YouTube under the Gen X Experience. Be sure to check those out. Like, subscribe, comment, you know the drill, review, share this with other Gen Xers who you think would enjoy the show. We're also on Instagram. Be sure to follow us, trying to grow the community over there. So if you're an Instagrammer, come join. And with that, I'm going to sign off the way that I always do, my fellow Gen Xers. Don't you forget about me, because I will not forget about you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Gen X Experience. If today's episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it on social media or with a friend. We'll see you back here next time.